Hello, I'm Isaac Kamau, an investment associate at Nabo Capital, and thank you for watching the Watchlist. This week, the main story was on Egypt, where the central bank held its key rates this past week. I think that was mostly expected by most of the market, just because of the various developments that have been happening in that market. We saw the inflation numbers coming at 9% earlier this week. Yes. The June inflation numbers came in at 9%, which was a bit of a surprise to a part of the market, but that was really just because of one particular segment, which was the foods. So food prices didn't rise as much as expected, largely because of a really good harvesting season. Typically when the inflation rate drops, you would expect the central bank to also drop its rates, but we didn't see that this time, mainly because the government, as part of its program to improve its public expenditure, has cut quite a few subsidies, primarily on fuel
and electricity.
And electricity as well. And this is likely to cause a bit of pressure on the rate of inflation to go up in the next coming months. So the central bank really tried to balance its two mandates, which is the one to grow the economy on one hand, and on the other hand, try to maintain the rate of inflation at a low level and keep it steady at that level. So this was really a compromise that the central bank had to take just to sort of try and balance those two mandates. I think the longer term outlook is that this rate is likely to come down. I mean, the deposit rate is currently at 15.75, which is one of the highest on the continent. The whole origin of this high rate environment really goes back to the devaluation that they had in 2016, in October 2016, which really put a lot of upward pressure on the cost of their imports, which really affected inflation locally. So they really sent rates pretty high. The highest level it touched was around 18.75.
Oh, for the rate, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so for central bank policy rate, 18.75. And since then, they've reduced it quite a bit, and the long-term trend is downwards on that rate. Really, as the impact of that devaluation and as some of the reform programs that they undertook after that begin to be fully factored into the economy, we do expect that rate in the long term to decline quite a bit.
Potentially, even in fact, we'll see some rate cut, maybe in Q3 or Q4. I've seen a number of reports by a number of analysts in Egypt and other analysts covering the market, saying that once this, the inflation has already been factored in or has already been recorded, potentially in this month of July and August, then we expect a potential cut by about 100 basis points, perhaps in October, November or December. So I agree with you that the long-term trend is definitely on the lower side, especially given the fact that they are targeting an inflation environment of 9 plus or minus 3%. And then the other reason as to why they attributed the fact that they held the lending rate, or rather the interest rates, was the fact that the geopolitical environment happening in the world that could potentially impact oil prices. And Egypt depends on oil of quite a bit. So anything that would affect the prices has to be taken into consideration by the central bank MPC Monetary Policy Committee whenever they're making a decision. And of course, recently there has been a lot of back and forth, Iran, OPEC, the US, just discussing about where will production head to, where will the prices go to, what are the fair values or rather fair prices for the commodity. And such discussions should be watched carefully, especially you remember the situation that was in was it the Arabian Gulf, the situation between Iran and the US, sometimes tanks being attacked, such situations could potentially affect prices of oil, and given that energy has a good level of weighting in the calculation of inflation in any country whatsoever, and especially a country like Egypt, then that could also be a factor. I think we've dealt with that topic quite adequately. Maybe we can go to West Africa and talk about Nigeria and some of the lending, rather banking regulations that came out early on this week, where you find that it's as if the central bank is trying to force banks to really, remove their money from both the central bank itself, from wherever they deposit their money and lend it out. Some regulations such as maintaining your loan to deposit ratio at about 60%, and the fact that the calculation has to be altered, where you find a lending to SMEs and small businesses given a weighting of about 150% in the calculation of the loan to deposit ratio, which would definitely not be like what we have right now. And you told me this morning actually that the amount of deposit that a bank in Nigeria can earn interest rate whenever they deposit with the central bank has now been capped at 2 billion naira. And previously you told me it was 7.5 billion. So you can see
pretty deep cut.
Essentially the central bank is trying to force these banks to put the money in the economy. And of course the central bank's argument is that this will prop up the economy, in the sense that there will now be more liquidity in the economy. Businesses that previously couldn't access capital are now able to access that capital and continue their business operations. So, and we also saw an interview with the
CEO of Access Bank
in Bloomberg.
He seemed quite okay with the move. I think we all understand where the central bank is coming from. They really want to spur the economy, which has not been doing that well since about 2014, when oil prices really suffered a huge decline. So they want to really try and kickstart the real economy by enhancing credit growth, right? So they're trying to find all these ways to make banks lend, which is definitely a good intention, and I think most of us appreciate that. And going back to what the CEO of Access Bank was saying, he was saying it's a very good measure. However, the only issue he somewhat had with it was the time frame was a bit short, because this was announced towards the end of June this year. And the banks are all expected to be in full compliance by September of the same year. Now that's only 3 months, and a lot of them will have to issue billions of naira worth of loans within that fairly short period of time, and that might be a challenge for some of them. I think most of the larger banks would be able to do it, but some of the smaller ones
have a long waiting
might
list.
struggle. Yes, that as well. That is a queue of borrowers waiting outside some of them. I think it's definitely a good measure. It's a good measure. The time frame is a bit short, but I think most banks will be able to.
And other than just what they're supposed to do, the central bank also came up with sort of a penalty, so that if you don't meet that threshold, 50% of the balance goes to you'll be mandated to add your cash reserve requirement by the central bank. So say your LDR is at 55%, so now the balance you have to take 50% of that
to the central bank,
and
you might not even earn on that.
And it will probably not be given back to you easily. So liquidity discussions in Nigeria is usually tough. And I was just thinking about what impact this will have. We are all aware that the NPL ratio in Nigeria, we're talking about an average of about 6.8%, and we are also aware that the average price to book for some of these banks is somewhere 0.7, 0.8 times the book. Such a situation will end, given the fact that you've said that the time frame is short. You'll be forced to lend to corporates, to SMEs where they haven't really done a thorough due diligence. So we potentially expect the NPL ratio to tick up at least in the near term, and that would potentially affect valuations of banks. And that means probably Nigerian banks will. We've not yet seen the bottom yet. So I don't know. Let's see how that turns out. Fantastic. So maybe we can. You have something else to say, or we can switch gears and go further south.
We can switch gears now to Congo, Brazzaville. There's some interesting developments for this week. For quite some time, they've been, in talks with the IMF to try and secure some sort of program. So that finally came through this week. So the IMF has agreed to a $440 million 3-year funding facility program with them. The main stumbling block to this program coming into place was just some of its debt, primarily with China. So the IMF was very keen to see that that debt restructured. Now, this past week it's been restructured, so the payment term has been extended on some of the obligations, and I think this has just paved the way for another MF to come in. And it's not just about the funding as well, because whenever the MF comes in, they have some advice, of the sort of programs that you need to implement to make your economy more robust for the long term, right? And going back to what we were talking earlier about, this is a pattern that's been in a lot of countries. Egypt, I think, has been one of the most successful IMF programs of late. There's also been a program in Ghana, which really helped them quite a bit to dig out of a sort of economic trap that they were in. So hopefully Congo Brazzaville will also experience the same. But I think in terms of just the issues with over indebtedness in Africa, I think there's been quite a few countries which have had this issue, especially following the drop in commodity prices in around 2014-2015, where a lot of these countries had foreign currency debt, and because of the drop in commodity prices, your local economy suffers, so you have issues or difficulty servicing that debt, and this is more or less what happened to Congo Brazzaville. And we're seeing a few other cases like that cropping up all across the continent, primarily among commodity dependent countries. I mean, Zambia comes to mind. Their case is still unfolding as we speak. I don't think they are close to an IMF program, at least as at now. So I think it's just an interesting trend that's been taking hold of the continent over the past few years. Hopefully, policymakers have learned a bit from this lesson to avoid this happening in the years to come. I think it's a good learning opportunity, just seeing exactly how to avoid getting into these traps and how to get out of them once a country finds themselves. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today and watching the Watchlist. Join us next week as we continue to unpack business in Africa.